70 years later, a 14-year-old black boy executed by electric chair is proven innocent. At the age of 14, George Stinney Jr. became the youngest person ever executed by electric chair in the United States. After 70 years, he was finally proven innocent in 2014. So what is the true story behind the 10 minutes that led to the unjust, racist, and tragic execution of a young African-American boy? So keep watching and we'll tell you everything you should know about it.
Welcome the watchers to Criminal Minds.
But first, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell button so you don't miss any of our videos. So let's get started. Stinney Jr. was wrongfully killed in the deep south of the United States in 1944 during the Jim Crow era. The Jim Crow laws, named after a character in a black minstrel show, were a set of state and local regulations that legalized racial segregation. They lasted roughly 100 years from the post-Civil War to 1968 and were put in place after the abolition of slavery to continue the marginalization of black Americans in the country. This was accomplished in a variety of ways, including denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, obtain an education, or in general, any basic civil rights that everyone should have. Anyone who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws faced arrest, fines, jail time, violence, and even death. Where Stinney Jr.'s family lived in the mill town of Al-Kulu, South Korea, white and black people were physically separated by railroad tracks, a location they were forced to leave after he was falsely accused of killing two local white girls, 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mara Emma Thames. A jury of all white men took only 10 minutes to find the boy guilty. According to the story, the girls were riding their bicycles in Al-Kulu looking for flowers when they came across Stinney Jr. and his younger sister Amy, who had taken their family's cow out to graze, and asked if the two knew where they could find maypops, the edible fruit of passion flowers, commonly referred to as passion fruit. When the girls realized the brother and sister didn't know where to look for what they were looking for, a lumber truck allegedly drove by, witnessing the interaction. When the two girls, Binnicker and Thames, did not return home that day, the local community responded by organizing a town-wide search involving hundreds of Al-Kulu residents, including Stinney Jr. The bodies were discovered in a ditch the next day with no signs of struggle, but were said to be violent deaths involving multiple head injuries. The Post and Courier reported that the girls' bodies were stiff when the preacher's boy found them in a shallow, waterlogged ditch in the woods. They were on their backs, bruised and broken beyond repair, like a pair of discarded dolls. A bicycle lay on top of them, its front wheel detached from the frame. According to the publication, an examination revealed that the murder method was bloody. Thames had a prominent cut and a hole that went straight through her forehead into her skull, whereas Binnicker had multiple blows to the head, with a doctor describing it as nothing but a mass of crushed bones. This is where the story divides. The first false and historically final version resulted in Stinney Jr.'s death. According to seemingly no one in particular, the young boy followed the two girls and beat them to death with a railroad spike. The second version, which has only been confirmed in whispers, is that Stinney Jr. and his sister simply went about their business, the girls to theirs, which led them to the home of a white lumber mill family, where they asked if the wife of the house would join them on their hunt for maypops. She declined, but the house's son arrived in his logging truck and offered to take the girls off to find their maypops while he unloaded the logs. They jumped right in. Then what? No other versions really mattered because suspicion fell on Stinney Jr. after he was identified as the mean kid in town. The county law enforcement officers were tipped off that Binnicker and Thames had been seen talking to Stinney Jr., so they stormed over to his house and handcuffed and interrogated him without the presence of his parents, an attorney, or any witnesses. According to police, the 14-year-old admitted to killing the two girls. All That's Interesting reports that an officer named H.S. Newman wrote in a statement that he arrested a boy named George Stinney. He then confessed and told me where I could find a 15-inch long piece of iron. He said he threw it in a ditch about 6 feet away from the bike. Stinney Jr. was detained alone for the entire time, with no indication of where he was being held, not even his parents knew. At the time, 14 years old was considered an age of responsibility as teens went through puberty. He was never seen alive by siblings again after that day, alone during the 83-day detention and alone in front of a solely white jury. Only when he was in his casket was the family reunited. The Guardian interviewed the boy's family in 2014, writing that Amy will never forget the last time she saw her brother alive. She was 8 at the time, hunkered in the chicken coop, scared half to death when 2 black cars drove up to their house. Neither her mother Amy, a cook, nor her father George Sr. were at home when white police officers arrived and handcuffed George and her stepbrother Johnny. Johnny was later fired. She adored George and followed him around everywhere. He referred to her as his shadow. Because no white people came around to the black side of town, The events of that day, 1944, when Amy and Stinney Jr. came across the girls, were said to be clear in her mind. "We didn't see those girls any longer," she continued. However, someone followed those girls and murdered them. Realistically, no black child would threaten a white child without serious consequences at the time, as Amy stated. "We didn't mess with white people." However, as I previously stated, Stinney Jr. was identified by someone through the grapevine, making him an easy suspect. W.L. Hamilton, George's 7th grade teacher who's black, told the Item newspaper in 1995 that he had a temper and had gotten into a fight with a girl at school, scratching her with a knife, according to The Guardian. Amy stated that she called Hamilton after reading the story. "That cretin, that was a blatant lie. When I found out about Mr. Hamilton's lie, I called him. I introduced myself as Amy Stinney, and you described my brother as a bad boy. You've got one foot on a banana peel and the other in hell." Stinney Jr.'s execution sparked outrage, with both white and black ministerial unions petitioning for his release due to his young age. Hundreds of letters pleading for mercy were delivered to the governor's office, but no one were enough to prevent his execution on June 16, 1944. With the Bible under his arm, the 14-year-old was strapped into the adult-sized electric chair. Stinney Jr.'s siblings never gave up on claiming their brother's innocence, and in 2014, 70 years too late, the jury found that he was wrongfully accused and sentenced to death. His siblings persuaded the court that Stinney Jr. had an alibi because he was with his sister Amy, now married as Amy Stinney Ruffner, 77, at the time the case was closed, and their cow. Wilfred Johnny Hunter, their brother's cellmate at the time of his conviction, reported that the boy had also denied murdering the girls. On December 17, 2014, Judge Carmen T. Mullen overturned Stinney's murder conviction, calling the death penalty a great and fundamental injustice. When the siblings of the 14-year-old innocent boy heard the news, they felt like a cloud just moved away. George Stinney Jr. will never have his life back, but his story, like every other racial injustice, will be told again and again. Echoes of the past can still be found all around us, generation after generation. We stand up to discrimination and inequality. So that's the end of the video. Thank you for taking the time to look at this. Please leave your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more great videos and current information. We hope to see you in more videos in the future.